In the cave beneath the hill, where old roots held the ceiling like gnarled fingers and the breath of the earth came up in slow, damp sighs, Bran Stark listened to the man grown into the weirwood and decided he would not become a story that belonged to anyone but himself. The Old One's hair had long since threaded into the pale roots that fed him and bound him. His voice ran like water under frost, soft, persistent, knowing the way without needing to force a path. He told Bran about the world as if it were a map of veins inside a hand. He could trace the shape, yes, but the hand itself must choose to open or close, to grasp or let go. He promised sight beyond any eyes, memory beyond memory, a steadiness beyond fear. He promised Bran would fly. Bran looked at his legs and felt them again without feeling, the ache that was only a ghost now. He thought of towers and crows, of emptiness and falling. He thought of his father's voice, and the courtyard where winter roses had once caught frost and light together, and how his mother had stood there with her hands clenched when she did not know he was watching. He thought of Robb's laugh. He thought of the old gods that watched from red leaves with white faces that never blinked. Across the cavern, Mira turned the head of her spear in her hands, the blade catching a distant shimmer from the glow that lived in the lichened stone. She had slept badly. The hollows beneath her eyes were truths that could not be lied away. Hodder hummed deeper than a song, rocking where he sat, his big hands cupped around his knees. Summer lay with his head between his paws, pretending a wolf could be still. Leaf watched Bran with the interest of something older than the cold. "Knowledge is a root," the old man murmured. "You may drink or be thirsty all your days, but winter is long. There will be no pity in it." Bran closed his hand over nothing. He had no sword to hold. He had no reins. He had the weight of that moment and the stillness of his own breath. "I've swallowed too many stories I didn't choose," he said. "I want to choose at least this one." The old man's eyes were lucid and whirled with milk and shadow. "And what is it you choose, Brandon Stark?" "Not to be you." The words surprised him with their strength. "Not to be your river. Not to let everything I am drown so the world might know more than it knows." Mira's head lifted at that, a flicker of relief and doubt crossing her face like a fish beneath ice. Summer stood in the same heartbeat, a ripple passing through his shoulders, one ear tilting toward the deeper passageways where water spoke to stone. The old man considered the boy before him with patience that might have been mercy, might have been despair wearing the skin of patience. "If you turn away from what you are, the snows still fall. The dead still listen for footsteps. The wolves on your banners are hungry and thin. If you leave, you do it not as a kindness to yourself, but as a wound for others to dress. My family is a wound I cannot leave to scab over without me." Bran's mouth was dry. He licked his lips and tasted the dust of roots. "I can see some things already. I don't have to be what you are. I can be what I am. A Stark. A boy. A warg. I can learn enough to walk without forgetting that I am walking. If I stay, I will never choose again. I will be chosen." Leaf's small mouth corked the way a bud opens in a late spring that thinks itself doomed to frost. "He has the bite to his words," she said. "It was always teeth that made men dangerous, but also wolves." The old one's voice lowered until it seemed to be the dark in the corners of the cavern speaking. "You would leave the wards. You would leave the only place the cold cannot find you. Outside there is the wind and the failing of light. Outside there is the winter that kills even memory and breaks the spine of resolve. Outside there is your name, and your name is a flavor the dead have not forgotten." Bran swallowed. "Then I will be faster than them, or quieter, or braver, or luckier. I don't know, but I'll be there, and no one will carry my eyes like a cup in their hands and pour me into anything that needs filling." The old man did not answer. He sat as if listening for a sound only he could hear. The roots creaked faintly above them, old wood complaining in its sleep. Somewhere in the tunnels, water dripped, and after a time the drip became the swing of a needle in his mind, counting out a life. Hodder shifted. The rock under him answered with a grating murmur. "Hodder," he said, and he said it like a prayer that was entirely sure of itself. Mira set down the spear and stood, unreadable for a long breath. Then she crossed to Bran and rested the heel of her hand on his shoulder. "You decide," she said softly. "I think I decided a long time ago. I just didn't realize what that decision was." Her gaze flicked toward the deeper shadow where her brother had gone into fire and not returned. "It's no kindness to me to stay," she added, voice steady even as it frayed at the edges. "I came to deliver you, not to watch you evaporate." "Evaporate," Leaf said, tasting the word with a smile that had nothing of mockery in it. The old man's breath moved through his chest like wind in a dry tree. "If you leave," he said at last, "I will not call you back. I will not rescue you if you falter. You will no longer be mine in any way." "Good," Bran said, surprising himself again, "because I was never yours to begin with." Summer's whole body was the hurtling of a decision, silent, complete, true to his name. He brushed his flank against Bran's chair as if he, too, had understood and approved. A low sound came from him, nothing of fear in it and everything of readiness. Leaf moved into the fuller light, the glow that was not fire and not day, a ripening of stone from within. "We can guide you as far as the outer ring of the wards," she said. "Past it our steps crush the frost. Tea as yours do. Your wolves will smell you and your enemies both. But there are paths the wind favors, and I will show you those paths. You will need knives that remember sunlight." She touched the satchel at her side. "I have some." They counted what they had. Mira spoke for the food, each dried strip, each handful of nuts, each twist of sinew that might be used to repair pack or clothes. Bran spoke for the rope that still held and the rope that would fail at the third knot. Hodder picked up the small, battered kettle they had used under the hill, as if he would carry it again on sunlight shoulders. Summer spoke with his teeth bared toward the tunnel that smelled of old death. Leaf spoke for the darkness and small secrets he could not yet taste in the air. Cold that moved like a creature and old footprints that held a story of the last ones foolish enough to walk in the wrong direction. They slept one last time under the close ceiling of roots. Bran's dreams were the same dreams they always were, except for the tilt in them where certainty had once sat. He dreamed of a hall where fire had burned along a trench long and low, of a woman whose hair had been the brown of earth at thaw and whose hands had been red to the wrist, of snow falling through the ceiling of a holdfast while men argued wisely and did foolish things. He dreamed of a raven that would not speak to him in riddles because he would not listen for them, and the silence was its own riddle. When he woke, his hands were cold and the taste of iron mouthfuls lingered as if he had eaten the wind. Leaf led them to the threshold, and the threshold was not a door but a thinning in the light. Beyond it the cave narrowed the way a memory narrows, until a single body could slip and no more. Hodder went first because his shoulders were the measurement for everything they did. He went sideways where he must, and the rock whispered to his fur cloak, and then he was through. Mira followed, spear strapped, packed tight against her back, head bowed and eyes watching for the sudden change in slope that would send a careless step sliding. Bran came last, his chair half disassembled and slung in two pieces across ropes that bit into Hodder's shoulders and into Mira's hand as she steadied one end when the ground fractured in treachery beneath them. Summer brought up the rear until he wedged himself briefly, a breath stolen from him, and then he burst free, furs dusted with chalk that made him old and pale for a heartbeat. They came up into a day that was no day at all, a sky like unlit lead, breath that smoked and clung and would not be fanned away. The forest was a library where all books were open to the same page. Pine, pine, the monotone perfume of resin. Snow hushed every footfall to a courtesy they might not deserve. What light there was seemed to come from the air itself, a memory of light repeating itself thinly out of habit. Bran's first feeling was that the world had grown so much larger in the time he had been under the hill that it did not quite believe he existed anymore, and might fail to notice him if he did not reach toward it. Leaf pointed east, where the trees leaned away from something. "The wind from the sea gnaws that way," she said. "It carves the drifts. It leaves bones bare." She pointed north, where the trees were thick and the snow fell softer and deeper. "There are dead in there. They listen and persuade." She pointed south, where a dark line in the day held itself like a thought nobody wants to think too loudly. And there is a wall your people built. It hums when we are near it. It hurts me, but it sings a song the cold does not like. South, Mira said. Bran breathed once, then again, and nodded. South. They began to walk. Hodder took most of Bran's weight. Summer ranged, never far, slipping between tree trunks like a memory of motion. Mira's eyes were not restless but always in motion, as if she had learned long ago that to keep looking was a kind of patience. Leaf moved as if she were the wind's cousin, down into dips and up again, her feet placing themselves in the thought before the thought knew what it had decided. She spoke only when the path grew complicated. Here, she would say, and show them a way to cross a frozen rill where the ice would hold. There, and signal a drift that had crusted deceptively, ready to swallow and freeze and preserve. They stopped when they had to and not because they wanted to. Bran learned the names of his aches again, and they were old names, familiar as the corridors of Winterfell. Shoulder, neck, hip that always wanted to be older than it was. He learned the small luxuries of travel. How the strap could be shifted so the skin beneath it breathed a fresh breath. How Mira's hand could tweak a knot and turn pain into manageable sense. He drank snow that Mira had warmed in the mouth of a bottle inside her coat. He chewed without joy and without complaint. He listened to the cadence of Hodder's steps the way you listen to a heart that is steady enough to trust. At their first camp, he realized that he had been waiting for someone to stop him. Some last admonition from the old man or some sudden kennelmaster whistle from the weirwoods that said, "Heel!" When neither came, he was first a little baffled, then resentful, then relieved, the way you sometimes feel after you realize the danger you feared did not even bother to look at you. He wondered if the world noticed any of them at all. They dug into a drift where the wind had piled snow against a fallen trunk. Mira showed Hodder how to cut the snow block with the short saw blade until they had a wall, the blocks locking together the way proper choices lock one to the next. Leaf found a nest of dead grasses under an old stump and brought it back cupped like gold. Bran's hands worked at the tinder the way he had learned in another life. He coaxed flame with a sliver of char and a breath he could not waste. The smoke went up and stayed low because the sky would not have it, and the smell of it made something in him loosen. No one said the word safe, because they had learned not to curse themselves with it. Mira scraped a thin soup together. The taste wasn't much, but it was warm, and it tried its best to be more than it was. Hodder ate with concentration, which was his way of respecting food. Leaf barely took any at all. Bran watched the fire until it began to look back at him. "What will you do when we reach the wall?" he asked, and he meant it for Mira as much as Leaf. "Go south of it," Mira said, as if he had asked where the sun slept. "Find men in black. Find your brother. Find anyone who still believes in an oath. Pester them until they remember how to act like men bound to each other by words and not by fear. They will think we are foxes trying to sell them our tails," Leaf said, amused. "But they will take what you give them if they believe it makes them stronger. Men are a seed that always tilts toward the light. It is not a virtue. They can grow upon bones as easily as upon soil." Bran thought of Jon, and the last look he had seen in Jon's eyes the night the world had broken into falling stones. He thought of the wall itself. Stories about it were a stew everyone in Winterfell had eaten since they were old enough to feed themselves. He imagined its face close, its breath a white gale that would pry their lives apart to see what was inside. He imagined the gate, which had a mouth and would not open unless it knew your words. He had read those words once, before the fire, and then he had heard them again in Jon's voice, not as a story carved into wood but as a door into a life. He wondered if memory would open doors the way oath could. "Leaf," he said, "you said you had knives that remember sunlight." Leaf drew the satchel close and opened it in her lap with small hands. She laid out 3 daggers of obsidian on her cloak as tenderly as a midwife sets down a child she has just pulled into the world. The edges were chipped in tiny crescents, black that drank light greedily instead of reflecting it back. Bran reached for one and felt the old cold in it, different from the air's cold. This was cold that had been born, not simply accumulated. They were flints when my mother's mother's mother could name every wind, Leaf said. Now they are for meeting neighbors who are not neighbors anymore. Mira took one. Hodder carefully took another. He turned it so it stood out black against his big palm. Hodder, he said, and the shape of the word was a promise. Summer sniffed the last blade, sneezed, and sat watching, uninterested in tools made for hands. Bran slept the way a fox sleeps in deep winter, tasting his own heartbeat, drinking its rhythm for warmth. When dreams came, they came through Summer's eyes first. The wolf moved as if he were the only true thing in a world smeared by wind. His breath was a rhythm of fog that thinned behind him as he ran. Snow met his paw pads and told him where the ground beneath it hid dangers. He was a runner with no destination and a destination in every running. The woods held their breath as he passed. The air was less a cold than a taste. The cold wished to be in him and could not be. He crossed the trail of a herd that had not done as well as it believed it had done. He did not follow, not today. He followed a scent he ought to know. The scent belonged to the same shape he always found when he came back to himself in a startled flurry. He found that shape curled in fur and leather, smelling of boy and smoke. He pressed his face close to the boy's chest until the small thrum there settled into a calmer grammar. He licked a hand that did not withdraw, and then he circled the camp and lay with his head on his paws, doing the wolf's reading of the wolf's night. Bran woke before the light improved. He lay listening to Hodder waking, to Mira laying out their food with care that would make it enough, and to Leaf speaking a language made of air and a soft strike of tongue that did not belong to men. The words were so old they felt new again. He thought he heard his own name in them, but that was likely pride pretending not to be pride. They marched again. The sky was a lid. The day beneath it deepened to its own colorless blue. They followed old game trails where pines had once stood thinner and deer needed corridors for their lives. They skirted clearings that felt wrong, where the air tasted of iron and roots were torn as if something had dragged itself by slow inches to some conclusion that had not ended well. In one such space, they found a ring of stones with soot still clinging to them, brittle as a scab, and the bones of a rabbit that had forgotten to be quick enough. Hodder's toe hit something half-buried. He crouched, hauled on it, and brought up an iron pot with a handle that had come loose at one end. Mira's hands were deft around it, her mind already measuring it against what she'd learned to cook and carry. It would do. It would be heavy while it taught them how to be glad of its weight. They reached a river by afternoon, a white curve with a dark seam down its center where the current would not be persuaded to freeze entirely. The ice near the shore made a music of its own, a creaking and popping as complicated as the inside of a skull with a thought trying to change shape. Leaf tilted her head and listened the way the old man had listened in the cave, as if the noise had not yet finished choosing what it meant. "Here," she said, pointing to a place where the ice had buckled and refrozen against itself. "The water likes this place. It has made friends with the rock underneath. It is less surprised when a weight touches it." Hodder went first again because he trusted not to be delicate. He shuffled his feet to feel for the sudden absence that is a hole under crust. Mira followed, spear used as a third leg, the butt of it testing as an old woman tests the firmness of a loaf she has made. Bran's weight shifted on his back like intention turned honest. Summer chose to run farther down, looking for a narrower place to leap. He found it and landed with a grunt that could have been amusement or disdain. Halfway across, a crack leaped out from under Hodder's heel like a rumor that wanted to be true. Mira's spear but shot down as if she could hold the world together with it. Bran's hands went to the rope out of instinct, though he knew the rope answered to them and not to him. Hodder made a sound Bran had never heard from him before. Not fear, exactly. A refusal. He forced his weight forward, fast and without looking back. The crack chased him but could not catch up. Then they were across, and the sound of the river returned to the music it preferred, and the ice pretended it had never considered treachery. Hodder stood panting, cheeks red with wind and with victory. "Hodder," he said, and the word held laughter the way a cup holds a small fire. They made a second camp that night beneath branches that had caught enough snow to make a roof. The quiet there was different from the quiet under stone. It rhymed the ears and sat on the skin like a second, thinner skin. Bran watched Mira rub her hands before she put them under her arms. He watched how she turned away very slightly, as if not to waste anyone else's heat. He watched how she checked the obsidian blade again and again, always calm, as if its presence added up to a sum she could live with. "Mira," he said into the pool of tinted warmth they had made, "do you ever hate me?" She turned her head and looked at him, long enough for him to realize he had wanted a quicker answer. "I don't know what I am to you," she said. "Sometimes I think I am the net and you are the fish and the river is laughing at both of us. Sometimes I think I am your friend and sometimes only your guard. Hate is too simple for any of those things." "Would you have me stay under the hill?" he asked because he needed to hear that answer in a voice that would not bargain with his heart. "I would have you be you," she said, "even if I have to burn half the world to keep that flame from going out." Leif's eyes on them were not unkind. "You have not lived long enough to be that fierce, and yet you are. It is a kind of weather that lives in men. They're storms that never learn to wait for the spring thaw." Bran smiled a little. It felt strange on his face. "Storms are better than roots sometimes." "Sometimes," Leif agreed, "and sometimes the roots drink you at last, whether you choose them or not." When Bran slept, he woke in a grove he had never seen with his waking eyes. The trees there were young by the standards of that place, which meant they were older than the names he knew for months and winds. The snow hung in the branches the way speech hangs in a throat, almost said. A weirwood stood among them, its face not yet carved, perhaps never to be carved. Bran's fingers moved toward it without his telling them to. He felt the bark begin beneath a crust of ice. He had thought the bark of such trees would feel like bone. It did not. It felt like skin that had stood too long in the cold and remembered warmth the way a man remembers the shape of an absence. His mind did not rush outward like a thrown stone. It went deeper like a knife slipping into peat. It went backward and forward the way a song recalls its own refrain. He saw a courtyard he had known lit by torches. The snow trampled into a story that said men had stood where boys wanted to stand. He heard steel ringing in a rhythm he could still hum if he wanted. He saw his father's back and it felt like safety and like distance at once. The weirwood let him taste that moment like the first sip of something strong, and then it let it go, not ungently. He pulled back with effort, like a hand leaving a frozen iron latch. Summer was nearby in the dream, hungry for scents he could not follow in the place that had no scent. The wolf's frustration spurred Bran to try again. He did, and the doors opened into another room that was elsewhere and elsewhen. He saw stone with firelight on it, a figure weaving her hair into a simple knot, her fingers quick with practice, not vanity. He saw a long table where maps lay like stretched skins. Men bent over them the way they bend over a grave that is supposed to belong to someone else. He saw the flayed man's banner. He did not see his sisters. He woke angry at the tree, as if it had cheated him, when it had only given him what he could hold. The next day they found tracks that were not old. 2 men moving ahead of them, each on foot. They had walked without care for being followed. One left a deeper print with a short stride. One crossed snow as if he had somewhere to be and did not intend to apologize to the drifts. Mira read them with her eyes half-lidded. It looked like a prayer. "They carry weight," she said. "Their print slides at the heel."
No horses, no sled, no snopsoes.
Unwise or in a hurry. She squinted at the smaller marks between and around. A dog or a small wolf with them. Pads splay as if the ground hurts. No blood. Summer smelled the air for a long time, testing the threads. His hairs rose in a thin ridge behind his shoulders. He did not look at Bran, which meant he did not need permission but would accept it if it were offered. "They move south," Mira said. "We move south. If they are men, they may be men worth knowing. Or not knowing." Leif crouched and touched the edge of one print with a finger. "This one does not lift his feet out of the snow properly. He has learned that placing your foot down is only half the task. One must lift it too if one wishes to move." He is tired beyond the tired a human speaks of when he says, "I am tired." He is the tired that comes after that. Hodder said the only word he had. It sounded now like a confirmation of a thought he had made in the long world behind. His eyes. Bran nodded. "We'll catch them if we can," he said. Quietly, they did catch them by dusk 2 days later. They did not try to be seen first. Summer could have leaped into the little campsite like a knife thrown with terrible accuracy. He did not. He circled once, twice, nose down, ears forward, tail a line of intent that had not yet declared itself. Mira went left. Hodder stayed where he was, because his best way of being quiet was to become the kind of mountain that trees learn to grow around. Leaf disappeared as if the air had been thirsty for her. Bran watched from the chair Mira had arranged at the edge of a hump of snow that made him hard to see and harder to approach. He felt a tremor in himself that said he was closer to other lives, and that closeness always made the world hum a little more, or perhaps he only noticed its humming more keenly. The men turned their heads almost at the same time, the way two birds do when a shadow crosses them. They were wrapped in everything they owned, which was not enough. Their beards were not for style or pride but for warmth, their hair clotted with frost at the ends. The smaller had the quickness of an animal that still believes each new noise might belong to food. The larger moved as if the cold had stiffened the hinges of him. He masked a limp badly. They saw Mira just before they saw Summer. Mira had lowered her spear in the way that is not yet a threat but that acknowledges possibility. Summer padded into the circle of their seeing and did not show teeth. The men froze as if drilled. The smaller lifted his hands until the heavy gloves made them clumsy signs of surrender. The larger's eyes went to Hodder, and you could see the arithmetic carve itself on his face. Wolf plus girl plus giant plus the person in the chair he hadn't yet sized. "We are not dead," the smaller said hoarsely. It was not a greeting. It was a decision made out loud. "Winter does not need us to make that true," Leaf answered from somewhere they had not been watching, and both turned toward her voice with a suddenness that made their balance betray them. "We go south," Bran said. "You go south." The larger man blinked as if language hurt. "We go anywhere not here," he rasped. His eyes landed on the Stark boy's face and stayed there. He had the look of a man surprised by recognition in someone he had never met. "You're kin to somebody," he said, and he said it not as a gamble but as a warning. "Hodder," Hodder said very solemnly. The men's surprise softened something that had been brittle. The smaller took half a step forward and stopped when Mira's spear acknowledged that step. "We have naught that you want," he said. "We have a pot and a trap that is old and mostly broken and a coat that's thin from the inside out. We have stories. There are parts of us that can still be eaten. Beyond that, we are the walking, talking remnant of other men's bad decisions." Mira's mouth moved at the corners. "We have a pot too," she said. "We are rich." They sat together after that because to sit apart would be witchery or stupidity. The men's names were Kedge and Albert, though even as they said them they sounded like names you give to unimportant people when the wind might carry the truth elsewhere. They had been with a band that had fallen apart under the pressure of their own needs. They had tried to trade with a group who had cultivated distrust with a dedication that could have turned a field, if it had wanted to. The band had had a leader who was good at hunting and bad at decisions, and they had followed him because people trained their lives on any line that looked like it could hold steady for a few days. Then it had been colder. Then food had been not enough. Then some men had died and the dead men had argued with the living about who had the right to the breath just now leaving the bodies of the first. Kedge and Albert had departed in the gray of that debate. "We go to the wall," Albert finished. "Say the old words. Be taken in. There is food there. There is rule. There is wood to burn. You won't be taken in without knowing someone," Mira said bluntly. "It isn't a hearth for all wind-blown men." Kedge smiled humorlessly around his cracked lips. "Then we will lean against it," he said, "and call that a kind of warmth until we find a way to make that metaphor more honest." Bran spoke before he thought the thought fully. "I know someone. He is a brother there." He could not keep the pride out of his voice when he said it, nor the ache. "His name is Jon Snow. The two strangers looked at each other. In their eyes there was the faintest kindling of a thing that was not yet hope and could not be called hope without insulting both it and the situation. "We will walk near you if you'll have near us," Albert said. Men walking together look less like meat for bold beasts. They did not make a pact so much as a path, which is a kind of pact the feet write and the rest of the body has to honor. They moved south by degrees. The trees thinned. The slopes spoke, and what they said were old words about ice and patience. On the fourth day out from the hill, they came to a grove that woke something in Bran's blood the way a bell wakes a choir. The trees were not all of the red kind, but one was, and it stood slightly apart, guarding or shunned, the snow around its trunk not as deep. Its face was not carved either, but sometimes faces not carved can still be seen. The bark had a shiver of white in it that pulled his gaze as if it were a voice under the skin of the world whispering his name. "We should move on," Mira said immediately, seeing his face. "I should see," Bran said, not looking at her. "I can still see a little. Not the way he wanted for me. Enough." "Leaf?" Mira asked, because Leaf had seen more of these moments than either of them had the right to guess at. Leaf bent her head almost imperceptibly. "Touch gently," she said to Bran. "Ta. Ku a breath you do not intend to spend. Keep it." Bran hauled himself down from the chair with Hodder's help, a movement that had once humiliated him and now only named a fact he had stopped fighting since there were other fights more deserving. He crawled through the crust toward the tree. His knees went cold and then numb. His gloved hand came off without him thinking about it, and his fingers reached the bark. They stuck briefly to the frost, hurt an honest sting, then found the small warmth that lives even in sleeping wood. Everything that happened next took less time than naming every breath in 3 heartbeats and more time than it takes a mountain to decide to lose a shoulder to erosion. He went down and in, and the grove drew him without fuss. It did not ask him to be more than Bran, and it did not require him to nail himself to the roots. He looked and was looked through. He saw the same courtyard at Winterfell, and this time it was a morning with roofs that steamed as the sun found them. He saw a woman with red hair crossing the yard, her arms wrapped around herself though she wore a cloak thick enough to lie under. Snowflakes landed on her lashes and melted there, leaving wet silver. She was not alone, but the men around her were all less real than her. He opened his mouth, and the name broke in his chest, Sansa, and the world did not care, because it had heard 100,000 names and lost them all. He saw a boy near her, tall for his years. The line of him settled early into what it meant to be a man. He asked the world for the boy's name, and the world gave him one he did not know, and that was how he understood that Winterfell had not only been held by the dead and by the Boltons, but had also been held by ghosts of a different kind. Strangers. He would have screamed then, but there are ways you cannot scream in front of gods. He tried again and saw a hall where men in heavy mail ate quickly, as if they expected to be interrupted by something that knew their names and would not forgive them for finishing their meal. He saw the flayed man and the dire wolf hang as if they both belonged. He saw no face he loved. He felt rage then, not the rage that lights your mind on fire and burns it hollow, from which you wake ashen cold, but the rage that puts iron in your spine and keeps your jaw from trembling. He took that rage like a cup passed to him by a friend, and he drank it carefully so as not to waste it. He let the grove go. He did not fling himself back. He thanked it, which was absurd and necessary. Mira was crouched near him and rose as he turned. She read his face and did not ask. Hodder's hand came down without comment to help him up. Leaf's eyes acknowledged a thing that men called sadness, but that the old things perhaps called only weather. "What did you see?" Albert asked softly, with the politeness of a man who is not owed any answer and knows it. "The shape of a thing being stolen and then wearing the disguise of being given back," Bran said. "Home." That night, after the fire had eaten enough of the darkness to be modest and no more, Bran tried something he had not tried since the hill. He closed his eyes and reached not for the roots of trees that remembered everything, but for the small black minds that lived in the shadows of branches and watched with a patience too often mistaken for stupidity. He reached for ravens. At first he found only a scatter of noises like drops of pitch on slate. Hunger, cold, the ever-present sorting of shinies from dulls, the old simple joys of flight that require no translation. He pushed gently, remembering the old man's warnings about pushing until you break what you want to keep. He found one bird willing to be brushed by his attention. It was not affection the bird offered, nothing so elaborate. It was agreement to be part of the same event for a while, as long as the warmth of his mind did not force it to lose its birdness. He let his sight slide into the ravens. He took the cold air into his lungs as if it were food. He beat wings that belonged to another shape of being. He rose above the camp, above the grove, above the sad white miles and the not sad at all miles, because the world's emotion about snow was only what you put into it. He saw the long bruise of the wall in the distance, like a boundary drawn by people who had not understood that boundaries can make promises they cannot keep. He turned south and found himself rejected by the song that rose from there, the wall keen and alive and cruel. He turned again and went east, testing the edges of cold. In his mouth was a sound that had belonged to ravens since before men learned to bind the shape of sounds into the shape of words. He tried to teach it one word with meaning for men, John. It came out an awkward, but syllable followed by two harder notes, the sound of a name raised in a throat that never learned it ought not say names. He repeated it. He pressed it the way a person presses their thumb into a bruise to see if it has stopped hurting yet. John, John, John. The raven took the sound not with obedience but with curiosity. It rolled it in its beak the way men roll unfamiliar food on their tongues before bravado or hunger makes them swallow. It flew until it found company. Another bird, then three, a congregation of voices that filled the heavy air with letters harder than snow knows. He forced himself not to force anything. He repeated the name until it lost some of its strangeness, and the birds repeated it without asking if they ought. He sent them toward the wall then, not sure where at that great long cliff his brother would stand, not even sure his brother still stood near it. If his message found the wrong ears, perhaps the wrong ears would still recall the right face. He gave them only one instruction, which was not a word and not a picture, but a feeling of gray and black and duty and laughter you pretend is not laughter because it is given in a place where laughter is not expected. He sent that feeling like a smell and trusted the ravens to interpret smells in the way they know how. Bran returned to himself. Sweat had frozen along his hairline, and then, as the fire baked the air between himself and the world, it melted. He shivered and did not try to pretend he wasn't. Mira pretended not to have watched him the entire time. Hodder pretended to whittle a stick even though his fingers were too big and the stick too small. Leaf pretended there was something very interesting about the point where her knife met the wood, carving careful spirals that looked like wind learning to draw. Kedge snored, gentle as if apologizing to the silence. Albert coughed 4 times the way a man hides a cough. Summer watched the little cup of sky between the needles and the stars that had started to coldly insist upon themselves. On the 7th day the world declined to be polite. They had entered a stretch where the trees bowed away from each other and the drifts were monkish and deep, their surfaces a study in small movements. Leaf had gone ahead again and had not come back in the usual 312 breaths. Mira's attention had grown as taut as a line made of catgut. Hodder began humming low in his chest, not an alarm, exactly. More an acknowledgement to the air that he knew it was listening. Summer stopped so suddenly that snow went up in a powdery bow wave around his chest. His body went still in a way that meant everything was moving inside it very fast and would translate to outside only when it had a reason. He made no sound. He turned his head to left, then right, and then every hair on him rose as if he had stepped into a memory that had taught him to be larger than himself. Bran felt it before he saw it, the way the temperature changes when a door opens to a room you should not enter. And then he saw them. They were not many, and they did not need to be. If the dead had learned anything, it was economy. They came out of folds in the snow as if the snow had been their skins. Their eyes were that particular wrong blue that makes everything around it feel like a lie. They moved with the carefulness of spiders and the insistence of water learning a new path. Their mouths worked the way fish mouths work on air. They did not speak. Speaking was a thing you did before and after you became this. They lifted their hands slowly, not because they respected their prey, but because the slow lifting of a hand can steal your courage a finger's breadth at a time. "Hotter," Hotter said. He rose to his full height and then a little beyond it, because fear makes some men smaller and some men taller. He held the obsidian blade like a new friend. Mira moved before Bran could say anything that would be either a prayer or a plan. Her spear was a line that translated one kind of intent into another. She kept Summer in the corner of her eye without telling her eyes to do it. Albert woke into violence with a startled oath that no god would accept. Kedge's knife had been made by frustration years ago. It gleamed now the way frustration sometimes does when finally given a use. Leaf came from nowhere the way a shadow does when it belongs to something you didn't want to see. She threw 3 small knives, and 2 of them found throats, and the dead whose throats now remembered sunlight in a different way staggered and dipped and dropped. The 3rd knife went wide and clinked through branches and did not land anywhere a living eye could see. The dead did not slow for the dead. They moved around them, forward. Bran did not try to be brave in a way that would make Mira want to slap him. He looked for what he could do. He reached for Summer and was already inside him before he remembered to ask. The wolf's mouth opened on a sound that was a word only if your tongue had been taught by the snow. He launched himself at a knee and took it apart with the gentleness one uses to take apart a puzzle made for a child, swift, precise, without glamour. He tasted the wrong cold in his mouth and spat it and bit down again on something that did not bleed and still needed to be ruined. Bran felt the ground under each of Summer's steps as Summer felt it. He felt the yield and the bite of crust. He understood where flesh had become something else and where that something else had its weaknesses. He went low and up, aimed at joints and the places where ancient knowledge had built hinges. When one of the dead swung a shattered arm with a bone sword in its hand, Summer went underneath that arc and came up into a crotch where in life a man might have learned to protect his life's pride. Summer pulled until bones sheared and the body went down like a trap out of bait. Hotter met a tall one whose face had been a boy's once. It had the same longing in it boys sometimes where when they are not sure they have grown tall enough to be looked at the way they want to be looked at. There was none of that now. Hotter put the obsidian in its chest and pushed until resistance ceased. The thing tried to pull him to the ground with it. Hotter planted a boot that had been mended 3 times and learned patience. Then he jerked his blade free with a grunt that was not triumph. "Hotter," he said. Agreement with a conclusion he didn't like but would write anyway. Mira had killed one and then a second. The spear moving with an efficiency made out of love and rage and a winter's worth of practice. She did not waste breath on cries meant to frighten or hearten. She saved breath for living. She took a long slice on her forearm when she got greedy for a quick finish. She swore inside her mouth where it would do its good work without taking attention away from anything more important. She pivoted so that Hotter would be at her back and she at his. She found a throat and then an eye and then the other eye when the first didn't make the right kind of end. She did not stop to tell the story of those moves to hers. Aleph, she let her body be the story. Leaf sang as she cut. The song was not for men and not for ears that had not lived while the ice over the sea had taught itself how to be a bridge. It was a thin song that sounded like someone drawing a knife on a whetstone made out of old wind. It made the dead wince in a way the dead had almost forgotten how. It made Mira's hands steadier, though she could not have told you why. Kedge died fast. He had moved left when he should have moved nowhere. He had looked at Mira for the space of a heartbeat to see if she would approve his next cut. The thing in front of him did not require approval. It went through his throat as if it had been promised that cut and was impatient. He made a sound like surprise, which is the last sound many people make. He went to his knees and then to his side and then to the stillness that is something else entirely. Albert saw but did not stop, because stopping is what you do when you want to join a friend too quickly. Bran pushed Summer harder, not with cruelty and not with carelessness. He felt the wolf's edges and did not try to be more wolf than the wolf could afford. He took a dead man's calf and shook, not to disorient. There was nothing to disorient, but to break the wood that had learned to pretend it was bone. He let go and moved, he bit and let go and moved. It was a workman's dance, not a king's. The snow in his mouth tasted of unkindness, and he spit it and did not let it live there. When the last of the bodies had stopped making the wrong noises and the wrong motions, there were 6 fallen and 1 running, and Leaf threw for the runner and did not hit. Mira threw and clipped the thing's shoulder. It stumbled and then forced itself forward faster, servile to its simple command. Hodder ran 3 strides after it and stopped with a growl that was too human to belong only to a man who said 1 word. Albert went to Kedge and knelt with a carefulness that did not belong to this place. He put his hand on his friend's shoulder and then drew it back because the body was already turning the wrong kind of cold. Bran watched him and thought, "We do even this gently if we remember how." He felt the bitterness come and go, and he did not swallow it. He let it sit in his mouth and teach him a moment's lesson about savoring what should not be savored. Mira wrapped her arm in a strip of cloth that had started life as some other thing and would finish its days a bandage. "We need to move," she said. "We've made a noise." Leaf's eyes had gone to the trees and stayed there. "Some noises attract what you fear," she said. "Some attract what you need, and some are simply themselves. This one may be both of the first. There are ears on the wind." They dragged the bodies into a shallow dip and covered them as one covers trash when you are ashamed of throwing it away where it can be seen. Bran hated that he was ashamed. He hated that he wanted to pray over them and could not find words that the snow would not laugh at. Summer marked the spot the way wolves mark the world. It was an honesty men sometimes despised because they wanted the world to pretend the things they did had no smell. They moved on. Albert's face had learned an expression that said his next winter would be worse than others even if the world became mild with a sudden mercy. Hodder's gait was heavier and alone. Mira was quieter, which is not the same as being more afraid. Leaf hummed under her breath. Later that night, when the fire was skein and soot and all the words had been folded and put away, Bran reached again for the ravens. This time he did not send them to the wall. He called them to himself. He taught them to think of the dire wolf as a thing worth following and not a thing that would make a snack of them. He taught them, too, to look for banners even in this part of the world where banners did not fly. He gave them pictures. A man with a face like a Stark's but older. A woman with hair like fire and a mouth made for hard words. He gave them colors, gray and white and then another gray. He pushed them south to where he knew the land bent toward the places where decisions were made loudly and then regretted quietly. He held on too long and Mira shook him, not roughly and not gently either. He came back with a gasp he had not meant to let go of. He looked at her and her eyes held the same question. "How much of yourself do you have left?" "Enough," he said, and he did not lie to her with it. For a time the weather itself was their only enemy. There are days even in the far north when the sun remembers the trick of shining for an hour or two and the world warms enough to make the frost in your beard a companion and not a jailer. There are other days when the cold walks into camp like a man owed silver and demands not only payment but interest. And then your breath feels like it has bones and your thoughts crack like ice on a shallow pond. They had both kinds. They learned to stretch the good kinds by not wasting them on too much optimism. They saw the wall again and again as they moved, and each time it was another wall, bluer, whiter, taller, closer, a lie and a truth. Bran had never seen it before with his own eyes. He had dreamed of it and been told of it and once, on a page in a book, traced a finger along a line that had been meant to represent it and felt foolish afterward. The wall had its own life that had nothing to do with representation. When they came near enough for it to fill the bottom of the sky, Bran felt himself become smaller in a way that was not humiliation. It was the way you are small at the door of a cathedral that is older than the belief that built it. "Listen," Leaf said, and tilted her head until the point of her ear learned the angle. They listened and the wall sang. It was not music. It was the hum of cold done so well it becomes a kind of perfection. It made Bran think of a boy's mind suddenly finding how the pieces of a puzzle fit and refusing to stop fitting them ever again. It made his skull ache low down. It made Summer's hackles ripple without rising. Hodder said Hodder and then said nothing, and the silence after his word was its own big thing. They came down to the old road where stone had once tried to stand up to Arctic weather and had done well enough that its brokenness was still a promise of order. The road went straight the way a man goes straight when he is trying to impress someone other than himself. It led toward a place they all knew, whether he wanted to or not. "The night fort," Mira said, and said it like you say the name of someone you once loved and learned to fear. "We could try the gate that is not a gate." Bran remembered the story told in a voice that had been proud and tired. A gate under the earth with a mouth and a voice of its own. A gate that would open to a certain set of words if it believed them. "Sam," he said aloud. He said the words and the gate opened. "Will it open for anyone who says them?" Albert asked, sudden hope making him beautiful briefly in a way the world rarely let him be. Leaf smiled very slowly. "You build doors and then are surprised when they behave like doors," she said. "You teach them to believe and then are surprised when belief is what they require. We can go and put our mouths near it. We can talk to it. Whether it will talk back is a story we will need to live to hear." It took another day to reach the night fort, though the wall felt close enough to touch. The ruins came up out of the snow like the bones of a feast eaten by a god. Crumbling, enormous, careless with fear. The courtyard was a bowl full of an old quiet that had learned to taste of superstition. The well at its center was a circle of black that had no visible bottom. Mira threw a pebble into it out of the very human wish to be told again that the world has laws, even here. They counted and did not hear the pebble speak again. "Deep," Albert said unnecessarily, and spat to prove he was not impressed. The spit steamed. Bran felt the place prick his skin. The stories were not all lies, it turned out. The thick door on the lower level was as he had been told. Wood so old it had forgotten how to rot. Iron bands set lightly the way jewelry sits on a throat. They found the passage that led down and the air grew steadily colder until it was not air, only thin punishment. The black gate waited with its face turned toward them. It was a thing cut from the wall itself, a mouth that was a mouth and not a metaphor because sometimes the world likes to make itself obvious. Its lips were the black of water deep under ice where light never gets. They had the wet sheen that belongs to mouths and the old sheen that belongs to stone. Mira stopped 3 paces back. Hodder stopped when the hair on his arms told him to. Albert reached his hand toward it, curious and reverent, and Leaf put her fingers around his wrist and lowered it with a gentleness that allowed no argument. "What will it say?" Bran asked, but he thought he knew. "What will you say?" Leaf corrected. "It is a conversation. Like all conversations, it pretends to be a test." Bran slid forward. The chair scraped on stone and made a complaint the size of the ages. He closed his eyes because closing his eyes often turned the world up. He remembered Jon's voice, the way the oaths had sounded in it that night when he had spoken words older than the walls around them. He let that voice fill his own chest and shape his mouth. He said the words that were not made for boys but boys had put in their mouths for centuries when they chose to become a different kind of man. "Night gathers," he said softly, and the mouth in the wall did not move and moved. He felt the air between his lips and that stone flesh bounce like a drumhead. He let the words untangle themselves in the air. "And now my watch begins." He spoke the oath as precisely as memory allowed and as truly as a boy who had never taken it could manage. He did not borrow Jon's feeling. He made his own. He gave the wall his winter. He gave it his anger like a hot stone, and his love for his brother like a shawl. He gave it a promise he could not make honestly, never to hold lands, never to father children, and he did not flinch at the dishonesty, because he thought perhaps the gate knew the shape of necessity. He finished and waited, his breath tasting of the cold mouth and the old stone. For a long moment nothing happened, the way sometimes nothing happens even after you have done the right thing. Then the black lips quivered minutely, as if the wall were shivering not with cold but with recognition. It breathed out a thread of air that smelled of distant salt and buried time. It spoke. "Who are you?" the gate asked, and in its voice was the sound of certain waves hitting certain cliffs for the first time and for the last. "Who are you, and what do you seek?" Bran opened his mouth and felt his body catch around the truth. He said, "I am Bran, son of Ned Stark of Winterfell," because that was the only answer that made any sense at all. "I seek passage." The gate considered as much as something so large and so old could be said to consider. "These are words for brothers who give away their names," it murmured. "These are words for those who forget their fathers." These are words for men who choose to be walls. It breathed again, and the breath was colder. You are not a wall. No, Bran agreed. But I will hold one. Behind him, Mira lowered her head. Hodder's hand came to rest on the back of the chair, a weight that was not heavy and was also all the weight in the world. Leaf said nothing. Albert took a step back because this was no place for a man who had only just learned how to be quiet for his friend's corpse. The gate moved then, not in the way a person moves, but in the way a hill shifts when a slow earthquake teaches it a new geometry. The lips parted, not with greed, and not with disdain. A darkness deeper than the wall itself yawned. Cold rolled out, loyal as any soldier. Go, the gate said, and the single syllable was a wave cresting in a winter storm at midnight. But what passes beneath me belongs to me in some small part. Be sure you know what you owe. Bran swallowed the fear that tried to rewrite that line. I will owe what I owe, he said. I will not pretend it away. They passed. Hodder bent himself into a shape that did not belong to him and made it his shape anyway because that was his way. Mira angled the spear so the tip would not scrape the ceiling and give away their position to the listening stone. Albert came last, and the door closed on him with a sound that was the end of a sentence read aloud in a voice that has no grief left for reading. The passage was long and not long. The air seemed to thicken and thin at different spots like an old man's blood. Bran kept his hands tucked into his sleeves not for warmth but to keep the shapes of his fingers around something he would not lose. A sense of himself not borrowed from anyone else. He whispered the names of people he loved, his mother, his father, Robb, Arya, Sansa, Rickon, Jon, and it felt like placing stones one after another across a stream so that when he looked back he would know where he had come from and could go that way again if it came to it. They came out into a lower place where the air moved as air moves in the houses of men. Unhappily, with purpose. They smelled smoke and shit and the old lard of places where meals are made for large numbers of people at once. They heard voices that had nothing of magic in them and everything of fatigue and humor and debate about whether a thing needed fixing or if fixing it would break 6 other things. Albert blinked as if he had stepped through a dream into something less beautiful and more survivable. South, he said, and then said nothing else because saying south here sounded wrong and also heartening. A man in black came around the corner then with a bucket in each hand, cursing without art at the way the handles bit his fingers. He stopped when he saw Hodder and dropped both buckets. The water splashed his boots and did not seem to surprise him. He took a step back. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at Bran. He blinked. Gods, he said, which is what people say when they are not ready to commit to any god in particular. What in 7 hells is this? Mira's mouth quirked, and she lifted the spear an inch higher to show him whose side she intended to be on if he chose to be clever. Friends, she said, or the nearest thing to friends you'll have left when the world finishes its tantrum. Which will you have us be? The man in black stared at them and then laughed, tired but not unkind. I am having a day, he said. All right then, come be someone else's problem. This seems like the sort of thing the Lord Commander will want to deal with. He bent to pick up the buckets, shook his head at his own wet socks as a man might shake his head at a dog that could not remember its name, and started walking with a resigned slosh. Bran rolled after him, the chair's wheels complaining about people who thought stone had ever been meant to be a road. Hodder's hands on the handles made the going easier. Mira walked with her spear the way a shepherd walks with a staff, almost peacefully. Leaf faded behind and ahead and to the side, as if she had decided men in black ought not have to learn a new story all at once. Albert stuck close, afraid to be left out of whatever trouble he had spent his last brave coins to buy his way into. They came into a room where men were gathered with maps and bits of bread and faces that made sense when you saw them together. They all turned. The room took a collective breath and decided that this, too, would join the list of things they had not expected to see at breakfast. Bran searched the faces. For a moment he thought, there, that dark head, that stoop of the shoulders that was a habit born of thinking too much. But no, the man who turned to him had a scar under one eye that Jon did not have and a mouth too often pursed. The man said something like a prayer and something like an order at once. It sounded like, "Who? Bran?" Bran said. and saying his own name in this place filled him with a heat that made the walls cold feel far away for a breath. Of House Stark, I would see the Lord Commander. I would see Jon Snow. The room changed then in the way rooms change when one word rearranges all the furniture. Men looked at one another, and in their looks were the stories of letters and crows and gossip and memory and grief. Driftwood broke in the tide of their faces. The man with the scar squared his shoulders as if something had just gone heavier across them. "You're late for that," he said, "and I don't know whether to be relieved or sorry." The world paused. Bran's body understood what his mind would not let itself understand immediately. He felt Mira's hand on the back of his chair. Just for a moment, the way you touch a person falling asleep to let them know the waking world still holds. Hodder said Hodder, and said it as if saying someone's name very quietly in a temple where you had never believed would save you. "Tell me," Bran said. His voice did not tremble, which surprised him. He had thought he would shake as he had shaken at the weirwood. The man nodded once, as if he were bowing to a god he did not like. "Dead," he said, and then not. He looked at Bran's face to see how much of that he would need to explain. Lord Commander Snow walked to a work only he believed in, and it carved him for it. More than once. He is south. He rides with a queen and with something that calls itself an army. Some of us believe him, some of us don't. We do our work here because that is what we have, and not because life has been so obliging as to be simple. Bran's breath moved in and out, and the first thing he thought was not "we are too late," but rather, "good, he is alive." The relief came with guilt's sharp edge because there were others he could not have that for. He let the guilt cut him and did not flinch away from the cut. "Then I must be south too," he said. "Hodder, Mira, Leaf." He felt Leaf's attention turn toward him, as if it had been always turned toward him and only now remembered to be seen. "If you will," he finished, because he would not order them. "We have a war to change." The room shifted again, this time in subtle gratitude for someone else's declaration. Men in black nodded to themselves, the way you do when a thing becomes a story you can believe long enough to carry you into evening. The man with the scar opened his mouth to speak commands, and then shut it, and then opened it again and spoke wisdom instead. "Rest first," he said. "Eat, warm your bones, then talk. If you must march to anything, march to it fed." It was not glamour what came after. It was stew and bread and a blanket that smelled like men and old soap. It was the soft thunder of a hall where many men ate at once, and the crash of dish against dish, and the bark of laughter sparked by the kind of joke that lives only between men who are all tired together. It was Hodder sitting with more crows than he had ever sat with in his life and being admired the way men admire things that could break them and choose not to. It was Mira sleeping at the table with her head on her arms for 6 breaths before waking and shrugging off the sleep like a cloak that did not fit. It was Leaf moving where nobody looked and being looked at anyway by eyes that were not used to admitting they had seen something beyond their experience. It was Bran letting himself be warm and fed and touched. It was Bran feeling the wall's song now as a bass line under his blood and not as an enemy. It was Bran finding an alcove with a draft and a piece of old, sun-bleached wood where he could put his hands and touch splinters and remember the sound of sand on wood in the old courtyard where he had once watched a sword master make Robb move like music. He slept again, and this time the dream found him on a different road. He saw the south as a smear of color, banners white and red and black, men as bits of stain on the snow, fire as the one bright, honest thing. He saw a queen with hair like night and a chin set to dare the wind to move it. He saw another queen with a mouth like a wound that had healed wrong. He saw a boy with a crown who was not a boy and not a man yet either, his hands pretending to be steady. He saw his sister again, or he thought he did, moving through a room where the walls had been made out of a man's pride and his ignorance. He saw his brother on a hill with wind flattening his cloak into a truth that could not be denied. He woke with a word in his mouth. Now. It was a foolish word for a world that had only ever offered not yet and too late. But he held it anyway. They left the next day not with fanfare but with the quiet march of people who have accepted that they will do what they can do and have allowed the arithmetic of that to become love rather than despair. The Black brothers gave them what they could: bread, a skin of something that called itself wine and then apologized, a little bag of onions that had the surprising power of making you believe in spring for a mouthful. There was a ragged pair of gloves for Mira that fit as if made for her because hands learn the shape they need when they are honest. There was nothing for Leaf because Leaf asked for nothing and men were rarely able to imagine in advance what such as she required. At the gate that led out into the world that men still pretended they ruled, the man with the scar gripped Bran's shoulder. "You be careful," he said, and the words were the same words Bran had heard 1,000 times in Winterfell, and they had never once meant anything other than love. It surprised Bran that he wanted to cry at that and did not. He nodded. "You be careful too," he said, and then grinned despite himself, because telling a man whose job was to stand at the bottom of a wall and hold the sky up to be careful was like telling a fish to poison mice. They went. The sun did a sort of violence to the snow, turning it all to glare and glitter so that between steps reality seemed to pulse. They kept to the old road where it made sense and left it where sense did not apply. The sky was like hammered tin and the wind like a blade that had been honed by boredom. They saw fox, hare, a great black bird that rode air the way kings ride horses, a set of tracks that belonged to a cat with big feet, and a patience that might outlast a winter. Bran sent ravens again in small clusters, teaching them names in the language that was more hunger than grammar. He sent them south, farther, and then not so far. He was learning the edges of his strength the way you learn the edge of a knife by cutting yourself enough to have the line drawn clear. Mira watched his face and never said stop and never said go on. She put her hand on his shoulder when he forgot to come back to his body quickly enough, and she took it away as soon as he remembered. At night, Mira told stories. They were not the stories of princes and dragons that children in Winterfell were fed like porridge. They were stories about the way reeds whisper when the wind leans on them and the way fish choose not to be caught. They were stories about food and chores and winters in the neck when the water froze in the upper inches and men had to break it every morning to reach the water nobody talks about. They were stories about letting people go and about holding on, and the sly moral in each was that both can be done well or badly, and you are not excused from becoming wise just because you are in love with someone. Bran listened as if the words were logs he could put onto the small coals inside himself. Hot. Or told his stories with a word and with little motions and with the way he looked at the world as if it belonged to him, because he carried those he loved without knowledge of arrogance, and that kind of carrying is ownership of a sort. When he saw a hawk, he said hotter differently, and Bran thought he would spend the rest of his life learning those dialects. Leaf told stories in a voice that sounded like wind in long grass in late summer. They were too old for names, and they were mostly about weather and stones and the metallic taste of time when it has been buried too long and the way grief can make a sound if you put your ear to the earth. Albert told stories about men whose bravery had boiled away at the exact wrong moment and about women who had the good sense to refuse to let their hearts be caught on hooks disguised as words. He told them with self-mockery and not a little grace. He did not speak of Kedge again except once, when he spat into the snow and said, "I never knew the word for the shortness of the time between the last thing you say to a friend and his going. That suggests the language is still improving." They came down at last to where the world split into roads that led toward places Bran had only ever seen in ink. Somewhere west was a castle that had been taken and retaken until its stones must surely have learned more oaths than any man there. Somewhere east was a sea that had carried back hope and blood in equal measure, though not often in equal measure at once. South was the river road and the warrens of war. South was a boy becoming himself and a girl becoming something sharp and a woman becoming something harder than she had thought she needed to be to survive. South was the glow coming off decisions that were already cooling into regret. They slept one more night under a sky that had started to remember how to be blue above the hard white of a winter that would not be chased off by the first timid offering of sunlight. Bran dreamed that night of a room he had not stood in since he had been a boy who could run. It was a room in Winterfell, not the warmest and not the coldest, with a window that faced the corner of sky where evening starts the earliest. He heard wind at that window and the sound of someone moving in the corridor outside. The door opened and his mother stepped in. She was dead and whole at once, the way dreams are greedy with miracles and stingy with comfort. She looked at him as if she were trying to recognize him from a painting she had once seen of someone she had almost known. "Bran," she said. and she said it with her true voice, not the way your own mind sometimes impersonates the dead. Listen to me. He tried to speak, but the old dream weight lay on his chest. You are not a tree, his mother said, her mouth fierce, as if she had been weeping and had not allowed the weeping to have the last word. You are not a bird. You are not a god. You are a boy and then a man, and the other things are only what you use to be that boy and that man better than you could have been. Use them. Don't marry them. He woke with the taste of tears that had dried because the air stole them while he slept. He reached for summer because he needed a place to be that was not his own skin. Summer gave him the world in scent and shape without asking questions. He looked through the wolf's good eyes at a world that could be named in simpler grammar and thought, I will not marry it. I will love it and leave it and return to it and not betray either of us by pretending we are more to each other than we can be. In the morning they set out along the river road. It was called a road because men need to call things names that make them less afraid. It was in fact a series of better decisions laid one after the other by people walking in front and people walking behind. They saw travelers in twos and threes. A man with a cart that held more pots than anyone could eat from unless you had an army. A woman with 3 children and a face so calm it made the air around her calmer by contagion. 2 men with the look of those who had nothing left to barter but their willingness not to kill you if you let them share your fire for one night. They heard rumors without the rumor capitalized. Men asked where they had come from and did not ask worse because something in Bran's face and Mira's spear and Hodder's sighs and Leaf's silence made their mouths thoughtful rather than greedy. They heard that a great battle had been fought on a field that afterward had been a mud of men and horse together. They heard that a fire had eaten a piece of sky down south and that some men said it was a comet walking and some said it was a god losing his patience. They heard that a castle had opened its gates to a girl and then the gate's hinges had been oiled with regret. They heard that the dead moved in the far north and that the men who said so were always the men who had lost brothers and needed their loss to have meaning. They heard that a man with black hair rode with a woman with more names than any decent person needed, and that they were either the saviors of the world or its last and best mistake. Bran listened. He tucked the words away the way one tucks away onions against a long winter. Not because you love them, but because they will make you live long enough to get to where love matters again. On a day when the wind ran itself weary and decided to lie down for an hour or two, they crossed paths with a small party of armed men in mismatched bits of armor. They wore no single badge that would save them or damn them in the eyes of a stranger. They walked with the gait of people who had learned to move in war and did not intend to be unlearned until death. Their leader was a woman with a scar across her mouth that made her look perpetually amused by disappointment. She stopped when she saw them and looked at Bran with interest. "Whose banner do you follow?" she asked. "Mine, brah," and said, before Albert could say something clever that would make this moment become dangerous too quickly. "And who's that?" she asked, not as a challenge but as a real question. "Stark," Bran said, "but I follow something older than banners. I follow the truth that winter will kill us if we don't stand together, and that men with knives in cozy rooms will kill us if we don't stop them before they invite winter in to help." She considered this. "You sound like a man who wants to lead an army and has not yet seen what armies do when they begin to love their own weight," she said. "I want to lead myself," Bran said, "and a few others who might listen while they still have voices their own." She nodded, as if he had answered correctly on a test she did not admit she administered. "If you find the black-haired man and his queen," she said, "tell them you have met people who do not trust them and will still follow them if they can prove they are not in love with their mirrors." "I will," Bran said. He meant it. They pushed on. The snow changed its mind about itself here and there, turning to slush and then ice again, choosing to be treacherous and then honest and then treacherous. The river that had been a ribbon of black under ice became water with ambition. They crossed a small bridge made by someone who believed that one day spring would carry more than just water. A cart ahead broke a wheel, and Hodder put his shoulder to the leaning side and straightened it without speech while the man who owned the cart protested and apologized and then protested more quietly and finally only cried without trying to hide it because some gestures of gratitude are too heavy for words to carry. That night, on a rise above the road, with the stars making small clean punctures in the day's thick skin, Bran let himself think what he had not let himself think while his hands were busy. He had said no to the old man under the hill, and the world had not ended. He had said no to being poured into the roots of everything, and still he had drunk from a few of their cups. He was still himself. He was still a boy learning to be a man. He had not become a thing that looked out of a boy the way gods look out of statues when men burn incense to them and ask for favors that would ruin them if given. He had kept his shape, but he had changed the war already, though he could not name how. He felt it. It was as if a thread that had once been meant to tie him to a place had been cut, and the loose end of it now trailed through the snow and through halls and through the hands of men who reached and did not quite close their fists. He had put himself into the world where decisions were made and unmade and made again. He had stepped out of a story that had been written by a man who had confused wisdom with ownership. He had stepped into a world where his mistakes would be his and so would his victories, if he had any. Mira sat beside him on the rise with a small potato in her palm, turning it, considering it like a jewel. "If we make it south," she said, "and we find your brother in truth and not only in name, what will you say?" Bran did not answer immediately. He thought of all the things he could say that would be beautiful and unhelpful. He thought of saying "I missed you," which was true and would have to come later. He thought of saying "I am not what you think" and also "I am exactly what you think," both of which were true. He thought of asking for forgiveness and for help and for patience. Then he said, "Whatever will move our feet in the right order." Mira laughed, finally, not in the way that makes camp feel smaller, but the way that makes it feel as if the sky has moved closer. "You have learned something I did not teach you," she said. "You taught me to use a net," he said. "That includes catching the right words." She leaned her shoulder against his. "Good," she said. "Because we are going to need every good word and every sharp knife and every stubborn friend to do this without dying too soon." "Or dying right on time," he said. She nodded. "Or dying right on time," she echoed, a phrase in which there was less despair than some might think and more promise. Leaf came and stood with them then, her presence small and vast. "South is not your only destination," she said. "The war you change will not know at first where to look to find the new shape you are making of it. It will try to look only at the places where banners have taught it to look. You must teach it to look at the dark between trees. You must teach it to look at the faces of small people who carry food to men with swords. You must teach it to look at wolves and at birds. Then it will be too slow to take you and too foolish to leave you alone." "I will teach it," Bran said, "and I will learn it when it tries to teach me in return. I will not be polite if the lesson is stupid." Leaf smiled. "That is all any teacher can ask," she said. They watched the stars until the cold drove them down into the huddle of blankets and breath. Bran slept and did not. He dreamed and also planned. He watched himself in summer skin running the ridge and also counted the onions in his pack and the feet between here and the next place people had decided to build a wall around something important to them. In the morning, when they rose, the clouds had opened their hands. The sky was a blue so thin it might break before noon. The sun was a coin someone had decided to spend anyway. Birds marked their small lines of business on the air and men below marked their larger, clumsier lines upon the ground. The road widened to accommodate the swelling traffic of winter's end pretending to begin, and the news on the wind thickened. There was a boy king, they said, who had grown into something worse than a boy and not yet into something better than a king. There was a woman who had trained herself to consider the feelings of others an affront when her own were so in tear. Sting. There were cells words with new banners because old ones had bled too much and nobody paid for that color anymore. There was a thief with a gift for finding people who had lost themselves. There was a wolf in the Riverlands who had learned to be more than a story. There was a girl who could change faces and had decided not to wear any for a time because each one had asked something of her she had not wanted to give. Bran let the words settle. He did not take them all in. He could feel the shape of the world's attention the way a man sometimes feels the changing pressure in the air before lightning. The world was bracing for something, and it was not sure whether to hope or to fear. It would do both because that is the way men live through mornings like this. They were 3 days from a town with a name nobody bothered to agree on when they met a small caravan heading north. There were furs and fish and faces bundled against wind. There was a woman whose hair had been cut not in a style but in an argument. There was a man who looked as if he had once been at home under stone and had decided to be at home under sky instead. There was a boy with a stick who poked at Hodder as if he could find out the truth of him that way, and then laughed when Hodder said Hodder, delighted that the world contained things like this. There was a rider who kept to the edge with hood up. When she turned her head, Bran caught the profile of a mouth he knew and the set of a cheek that had come from a mother who could freeze the air with a glance when her children were foolish. He stared. The rider felt his stare as if it had been hands. She turned her head. She looked at him. For a breath, the day made a little pocket around them and let them own it. The woman was older than the last time he had seen her face up close. The mouth was sharper, the eyes brighter with hurt. The world had cut her and she had cut it back. He tasted iron and remembered laughter. He opened his mouth. The word that wanted to be first was a child's word. He swallowed it and said the name that would fit her best as she was now. Arya, he whispered. The rider's face did not move, and then it did. Not an expression someone else could read, not from a distance. A twitch, barely, of one corner of her mouth. A tiny lean forward that could have been the horse's motion and was not. Summer stood, and the fur along his spine made a ripple that would frighten men who did not know that sometimes a ripple is joy. Mira's hand tightened on the spear without thinking because some reunions attract knives as flies. Leaf exhaled through her nose a breath that might have been amusement or relief. Hodder said nothing, which said a great many things. The rider's mouth opened. A half-word formed, and then she shut it, as if remembering that saying a name is sometimes the same as making a promise you cannot keep. She held his eyes one heartbeat longer, a language older than words, and then she turned her horse's head away. The caravan moved on. She moved with it. The boy with the stick poked at Hodder one more time, came away with a Hodder for his collection, and trotted to catch up, humming a tune that gets taught by daybreak on roads like this. Bran did not call again. He felt the pain as he let her go, but it was not the pain of a wound inflicted by an enemy. It was the ache of understanding. The road will take you where you can do the most harm to the right people, it said. Not all homecomings are a good idea. He watched until she was a dark shape that could have been anyone, and then not even that. Mira exhaled a laugh that was nothing like laughter and everything like an apology. The gods are comedians who tell jokes we haven't learned to understand, she said. Leaf shook her head. The gods tell no jokes, she said. We tell jokes to keep from becoming gods. It is a good habit. Keep it. Albert wiped his eyes without being ashamed. If there is one mercy in the world, he said, surprising himself, it is that sometimes it lets us glance through doors it is not ready to open yet. Bran nodded. We will find her, he said, or she will find us, or we will both find something else and like it better and choose not to tell anyone that that is what happened. They made camp that night in a hollow. The snow had retreated to the edges and the ground showed through in patches of dirt with a smell like a book opened for the first time in many years. Bran lay on his back and watched the common stars do their uncommon work. Mira rolled the potato in her hand again and decided to cook it slowly near the edge of the fire, because good things take time. Hodder fell asleep with his mouth open and snored like a door swinging slowly in an empty hall. Leaf hummed the thin song that had no words. Albert spoke Kedge's name once and then spoke no more. Bran closed his eyes and felt south, the way a man feels the weather changing in his old broken bones and calls it prophecy. He felt something gathering that was larger than any single will and more stubborn than any single plan. He felt it like a wind that had not yet rounded the hills to find him. He knew he would have to stand when it came. He knew he would have to fight without becoming what he fought, and he knew that he had a chance to do that because he had said no when a part of him had wanted to say yes out of fear of being ordinary. He slept and dreamed of standing on a plain piled with snow and men, and of a sound like ice cracking across the shape of a continent, and of a raven that had learned a new word that did not belong to it and loved the taste of it more than it would admit. He dreamed of hands holding his shoulders, Hodder's, Mira's, and of another hand at the back of his head, not pushing, only steadying. He dreamed of a red door that would not open and would not need to. He dreamed of his father's voice telling him that in the end a man is a bundle of choices, and he woke and found that he believed it. In the morning the wind had shifted. It came soft from the south with a memory of things it had passed over. In it were the smells of men and cooked fat and the faintest, most unsubtle spice of smoke that had taken trees to their end. There was also something else in it, a metallic edge that made Summer lift his head and make a low, curious sound. Bran breathed it and thought of steel and of dragons and of a woman making a choice she had believed she would never make because the world had taught her a different song. "Now," he said, and this time it did not sound foolish. They broke camp. They began to walk, and each step wrote a line into a story that belonged to nobody but themselves, a story that would cross other stories and tangle with them and pull them and be pulled, a story that had already, in ways invisible and unavoidable, tilted the great scale on which the war balanced. The scale would not notice, of course, not yet. Large things take time to understand they have been moved, but it would notice in the end, and when it did, it would be too late to move back. Bran tightened the straps that held him steady on the chair. Mira took her place at his side. Hodder hummed and began to push. Leaf sniffed the wind as if there were a message for her hidden in it. Albert adjusted his belt and his expectations. Summer bounded ahead and then came back to touch Bran's hand with his nose once. A benediction the wolf pretended not to know he gave. The road widened again. The light improved and then failed and then improved. The world changed and unfolded and resisted and welcomed, as it always had and always would. Bran moved into it as a person with a name and a choice, and if the gods watched him from their red leaves, they did so without complaint, perhaps with a smile. He did not belong to them. He belonged to himself and to those beside him, and to the war that needed changing, and to the winter that had never promised not to kill him. He belonged, finally, to the story that had let him in because he had refused to be written only by another hand. And he was glad, and he was afraid, and he was entirely alive. And the day went on.